Now we're going to hear from a senior mentor at Ysgol Gyfun Rhian Wyn, who's going to be talking to Rhian Wyn Griffiths about her experiences working with mentors and student teachers around observation and feedback.
Rhian, what approaches do you take to student-teacher feedback and what influences this?
I think when they first come to you on their first placement and they start observing lessons within the department all over the school, is to get them to start straight away by looking at the pedagogy, by looking at the techniques employed by that teacher they're watching. And then when they give you the feedback about the lesson, not to concentrate on the personality of the teacher, because personality has nothing to do with it. Good teaching comes from knowing your class and choosing the right techniques for that class on that day. And therefore giving them the language of evaluation and giving them the ability to start looking with you and with each other, because obviously when I see them in the senior mentor meeting once a week, we'll all discuss the lessons that we've seen. And so together we're looking at what worked, why did it work? So what did that teacher do and how do you know that that worked with that class? What could you see in their work? What could you hear in their discussions? And what did the teacher use? Did the teacher use, the whiteboards? Did she use an exit ticket? How did that teacher know that that teaching technique had an effect on her class? So you're almost taking personality out of it. And there's something about listening to the way that they will give feedback, because that will give you as a mentor an insight into how they would like feedback to be given to them. Because you have to be careful in that first term they're with you, that the feedback is given in a positive way, but also it allows for them developing as young teachers.
Okay, Rhian, what are you hoping to achieve with all these different approaches that you're employing?
I'm hoping that the mentors will give feedback from the point of view of the techniques chosen and the effect on the pupils. I'm hoping that each feedback session is a conversation, that the students are aware of why they chose those techniques during those lessons with that group of students, that there will always be a chance to improve during that feedback session. And in that chat that they're looking at what was the intention. So to go back to their lesson plan and think step by step, right, what did you want to happen when you chose that technique? Did it work? Was there progress? Did the students make progress? If so, how do you know? How can you prove that those pupils made progress during that lesson? And then I think the most important questions at the end of any feedback is, so what are you going to read next? What piece of research are you going to look at next? What would you like to observe? Do you want to do a bit of teaching to the top? Do you want to look at classroom management? Do you want to look at improving literacy? And also to have the opportunity for them maybe to team teach or to pit stop teach within that process. And then thirdly, to ask them at the end of each session, what would you trial next? And in that trial, in using that trial, what are you going to trial next? It gives them the opportunity to know that they can try something, and if it fails, it doesn't matter because it's a trial. And if it fails, then you read something else, or you observe something else, or you team teach something else.
Lovely, Rhian. And to finish, does your approach change depending on the student teacher that you're actually mentoring at the time?
Yes, it does. It depends on the student teacher, and it depends on whether it's the first or the second placement. And also on various things. If you think about their upbringing, their education, how they received feedback when they were being taught by teachers, because we can be a very scary lot. And we have to remember that we're dealing with adults, because we're so used to dealing with young children and teenagers. So the language needs to be different. And I think that's where I was stressing it needs to be a conversation, not that they're just listening to you give feedback. Sometimes not to be afraid. If a student is brilliant and the lesson is fantastic, then tell them so. But also get them to evaluate why that lesson was so good. And it felt good. Did it also have that effect on the pupils? Did they make progress, and how do you know? With students who are maybe a little less confident, we've tried things. Sometimes we've asked a senior teacher or a very confident teacher within the department to teach, employing some of the techniques that maybe that new teacher is struggling with. And then I will then evaluate the lesson with that student teacher. And it kind of gives that distance between the personality that you're watching and the techniques. So what we look at is the techniques employed and the effect of those techniques on those pupils in front of us. And they gradually then become more confident because they know you're viewing their lesson in the same way, not judging them, but judging their approaches, and they're developing pedagogy.
You alluded to pit stopping earlier. Can you elaborate a bit more about that? Then,
it's not one of my ideas. It's an idea that was introduced for NQTs, I think, by a university in Wales. And if a student teacher is going to try a new technique, and instead of it being a cold observation, they're allowed 3 pit stops. So if they're struggling a little bit with this new thing they're doing, they can go to their mentor and ask for some guidance. In the same way, if the mentor can think of a way to improve the lesson, or maybe get that little table over there who's lost the will to be a bit more involved in the lesson, then they can give them some guidance. And a lot of students like it because it feels like a safer place to be, even though they are still in charge of the lesson, and the pupils are completely unaware that the pit stop is happening.
Lovely. Diolch, Rhian.